I've owned this guitar for about 43 years at this point, and we're growing old together, I guess. It's one of a number of FG guitars that I've collected over the years, and since people often ask me about these, people here on YouTube or my students, I thought it might be interesting to share what I know, and I don't know an awful lot, but I do have a bit of experience of these. It's not going to be a comprehensive study of the Yamaha FG series, and perhaps not everything I say is going to be completely correct, but this is going to be my take. Yamaha started producing acoustic guitars in the mid-60s. I think 66 was the first year of production, mainly to export to the West. America was the big market, and of course they were competing with American manufacturers such as Gibson and Martin, Guild, and so on. They couldn't compete on quality, but they could compete on price. We're at the scrag end of the American folk revival by this point. There's a big market for acoustic guitars of a certain type at a price point. And Yamaha were able to take a really fresh look. They didn't have a culture ingrained, perhaps like the American manufacturers, that things had to be done a certain way, that there were certain no-go areas. The Japanese looked at the materials available, sourcing them, storing them, processing them, and the whole process of building the guitars with massive amounts of automation. And the big thing, of course, that they did was they used plywood. Now, we call it laminate, but actually this is really plywood. The fronts, the back, and the sides of this guitar from 1980 or so are plywood. To be nerdy, a laminate is when two or more veneers are stuck together with the same grain orientation, but of course with the plywood we have north-south and then east-west and back to north-south and so on. So that's what you've got here. The top of this guitar is 3 veneers of spruce in 3 different orientations. Back this way and then back again. So it really is plywood. In fact, and I might take a picture to see, you can just about see in certain places, I think here where I've worn it away, you can just about see the grain going the other way. So this was the main way that they were able to cut costs. You might think of that as cutting corners as well, but one thing they had to do, apart from making guitars that would sell, they had to make guitars that would withstand the voyage wherever they were going, a long sea journey. So they had to withstand temperature changes and fluctuations in humidity too. So that was built into the manufacturing process. They knew what they were doing in terms of glues. You might know that the bracing that, supports this thin wooden box isn't necessarily quite as sturdy as it ought to be. And of course, guitars of a certain age start to fold in half. This is just a thin wooden box with a long arm out here, and with this cable, essentially 6 cables attached here and tight, this thing eventually is just going to fold in half. And that's actually what's happening with these guitars. So this isn't unique to Yamaha, but it is a particular issue with Yamaha. Yamaha produced huge numbers of these guitars and many of them have survived, but you just want to be careful. If you're buying one second-hand, if you've seen one on eBay or elsewhere, just check how much room you've got to adjust the action. I just want to talk about that straight away. I don't know a huge amount about this, but you can't adjust the action from the truss rod. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. The truss rod is really to adjust the straightness of the neck. It won't change the angle at which the neck and body join, and that's the issue, of course. Essentially, the neck is folding up. So there are a few things you can do. You can take down the saddle, and when you can't take down the saddle anymore because it's almost flush with the bridge and the strings have a break angle that isn't really sufficient to create a kind of a crisp beginning to the vibrating length, you need to take down the bridge as well. And you can see that this one has been planed well to within a couple of mil of its life. I bought this guitar from my friend Nicky in about 1982. I guess this guitar was just a couple of years old by that time, but already then this bridge had been planed down. So whatever trauma it had, whatever problems it had with adjusting, happened very early on in the life of this guitar. Actually, it hasn't moved very much since. The next thing to do, if you really wanted to, if this continued to happen and you really wanted to sustain this guitar, would be to have a neck reset. And let me tell you, neck resets, 500-600 quid. It's much more than you would pay for one of these guitars, a decent one of these guitars as well. So it really isn't worth doing. You're never going to get good value by buying an old Yamaha guitar like this, even one of the red label ones, and performing or getting someone to perform a neck reset on it. It just isn't worth it. I mean, if the guitar is an heirloom and it's precious to you and for whatever reason you've got the money to spend, but that's not a purely economic decision you should be making. But that's this guitar. This is the FG335. These were made between 1977 and 81, and then there's a Mark II model that was manufactured up to about 1985. And the Mark I version, in common with all the Yamaha guitars at this point, has an access panel for the truss rod up here on the headstock, and after about 81 that switched to here where the modern guitars are. There would be an access point down in the body. So that's the main difference. In fact, I think that's really the only difference. I would say these guitars, and they're very, very abundant, you probably shouldn't pay more than a couple of £100 for one of these if you find it. If you can play it before you buy it, good, but if you can't, be sure to demand photos that will give you a real close-up of how much bridge you've got left, because you will probably at some point be looking at ways to mitigate what is inevitable with these guitars, as I say, as they slowly collapse. You will perhaps see, and this is true of all acoustic guitars, a bit of a belly bulging here. That's perfectly normal. You know, that's not an issue. If you put a straight edge over one of these, you'd expect a little waggle of a few mil. That's not a problem. That's perfectly normal. The sides here by the sound hole, that's a weak point obviously, and they will move slightly in. I mean, if you imagine this made out of cardboard and folded up like that, you can imagine how it would crease. That's exactly what would happen. So it's not particularly solid. It's not a very loud guitar either. I've got the action pretty much as low as I can get it now. I have to say I don't play this guitar very often. The strings aren't very new, and my friend Nikki, who I bought this from, reminds me every 10 years or so how much she regrets selling it to me. So Nikki, if you're watching, I dare say at some point this will come back to you, but not until I finish this video. Anyway, that's the FG335. It's a lovely instrument, really. It's pretty, it's quite delicate, and it plays quite nicely, but it's not a real strummer, it's not a real boomer, it's quite a delicate instrument. It would only ever really stand medium light strings, and not just because of the issues with the action, but just because it's quite a delicate guitar. And if that's the kind of sound, there you go, it can make a sound. And if you're after a delicate picker like this, then I reckon this wouldn't be a bad bet. I'll just say about the FG series, and you may or may not know this, but Martin guitars, after which these are loosely built, the D18, the D28 and so on, the distance between the strings here at the bridge pins is 55mm. That's the standard for a Martin acoustic, a dreadnought if you like. These are 50mm. So the strings are very, very slightly closer. 44mm at the nut, I think, is identical to Martin. They're very slightly shorter, just a little bit more compact, and they do feel just a little more petite under the hands. And my interest in these guitars did start with this one, but perhaps not in the way you'd expect. I mean, early on it was okay. It was good enough to play, but it was quite a beginnery guitar. And I think, you know, you have to understand this range of guitars was designed to be affordable. It didn't have a great sound. It was okay for me, but as I got a bit older, when I started teaching guitar, I decided I needed something a bit more grown up. And actually, a guitar that's languishing in the rack there, currently strung to Nashville tuning, so it doesn't spend much time on my lap. I bought a Landola, a Finnish guitar with a solid spruce top, and that was a lovely upgrade, if you like. And in fact, by that time, I'd had this for about 10 years. It was still kind of okay, but I didn't really have much use for it, so I lent it to a friend of mine who was a student, actually, and I kind of forgot about it. And when she moved back to Australia, she called me and said, "Oh, I need to give you a guitar back." I said, "Well, you know, just leave it at reception at City Lit and I'll pick it up." And when I did pick it up, I opened the case, and I could see that the back had a big crack in it all the way around here. And I have no idea how that happened. Somebody somewhere dropped the guitar, and I'm certainly not going to apportion blame. I have no idea. These things can happen. But it was a very sad guitar at this point, and I'd sort of resigned myself probably to not playing it anymore. So I took the strings off, and I took it to Hank's in Denmark Street, and the young woman there did a great job, actually used epoxy to fill. I don't know if you can see that, you probably can't, it's not particularly interesting, but you know, big fill in the cracks there. And yeah, you can see that. That's the extent of the damage. I mean, you know, this thing has been knocked about and loved quite a lot. And I figured when I got it back, I would put strings on it and maybe keep it at City Lit in case someone else wanted to use it, or maybe I would, I don't know, lend it to someone else or put it in another tuning or something. And I started to play it. I put the strings on and I thought, I don't remember this guitar being anything like this. It had a kind of precious brilliance to it, had a sophisticated voice that it hadn't had before. I mean, it was just a quiet strummer, but it was delicate and subtle and just very lovely. So I Googled back in the day, I don't know if it was, I Alta Vista'd maybe, and there was a certain corner of the internet at that point that was completely alive with people saying, oh, my cheap Yamaha guitar is suddenly sounding much better. And this is the thing that happened in the late 90s, I guess, to these guitars. It had probably been happening for some time by the time I was aware of it. There was this whole wave of cheaper Yamaha acoustic guitars that were having a bit of an awakening, that were maturing, and whether it's the woods that were used or the glue or something in the process, but the guitars that had survived this far were suddenly in huge numbers sounding magnificent. And this has never had a very loud voice, and it's got really old strings on it right now, but it is just more subtle and more sophisticated than ever it had been at that point. So that, I guess, is why these guitars have a cachet. The red label ones, which were the ones that were manufactured in Japan, the original ones like the FG 180 and so on, these are classics and are starting to command huge prices. This one's made in Taiwan. I don't think it's a worse guitar for that, because they were very consistent in their manufacturing standards and the methods and the materials and so on and so on. And of course they were learning as they went. So I wouldn't poo-poo, if that's the word, a made in Taiwan guitar just because it doesn't have that famous red label. But you know, we're beginning to see that there's this awakening, if you like, of these guitars. Not all of them will have it, but that goes some way to explaining why it is that these guitars are held in high regard now. Now here's another very similar guitar. In fact, this is the same model. This is another FG335. You might notice though that this one looks pretty much brand spanking new. The serial number tells me it was made on the 3rd of March 1981. I can't read the serial number on the other one you just saw. I'd love to. I really have tried, believe me, but it's just too indistinct at this point. This one has had nothing like the life that that other one has had, which is why it looks so crisp and fresh. I bought it on eBay about 15 years ago, and I would not have paid more than about £120 for it. I bought it from a man in Preston, Lancashire, which, if you're not from the UK, you may not know, is right at the other end of the country. I took a day trip on the train. He met me at the station where he handed it over, and he said that it was the first time that the guitar had been out of the house since he bought it in about 1982. And as far as I'm concerned, he'd hardly played it in all that time either. So it had a trip home with me. It went to France once in a Hiscox case and came back. I've taken it to the shed once and it's come back from the shed, but as far as I know, those are the only air miles this guitar has ever had since he bought it. I can't compare it precisely to the previous one because apart from anything else, this one has a lovely fresh set of Elixir strings on, and it has a more robust character. It's just a slightly more generous guitar. It does have a bit of volume. But still, these are light strings. It's an overall slightly more musical guitar. It's a better player, I have to say. And I don't know whether it's because it hasn't been played much or because it hasn't had anything like the knocks of the other one, but it hasn't undergone any kind of movement. It doesn't have any of the issues that that previous guitar had. And you can perhaps see that it still has plenty of life in the bridge. In fact, it's as fat as the day it was made, so nothing's ever happened to this. I haven't really had to tweak anything. I mean, sometimes winter to summer I'll adjust the truss rod, but it's never had anything happen to it. I might have made a new nut for this one at some point, just because I like to fiddle with guitars. But this is a lovely guitar, and this one, as I say, I was lucky to find, I guess, but there were plenty of them around, and you don't have to pay silly money for a really lovely old Yamaha guitar. Now, that model you've just seen, the 335, they were produced between 77 and 81, and at this point Yamaha started introducing their first solid top models, and this is one of them. This is the 365. It's exactly the same dimensions and the same weight as the 335, but it has fancy binding here along the fingerboard and around the headstock, and it has upgraded fret markers. And of course it has this solid top. This particular one hasn't had anything like the trauma that that first 335 has had. The bridge is still nice and fat, and it's a beast. It's just a different kind of guitar. It just feels much more substantial. I don't have very much to add to this. This particular one was made on the 6th of September 1979, and it's not doing badly for its age. I sometimes have this one strung in DAG-GAD tuning, but I have plenty of delicate little guitars that are great for fingerpick, and this one mainly I use for strumming. I will just say that in common with all of these guitars, if you have the right kind of microphones and you halfway know what you're doing, these are really good recording instruments too. But I guess the big thing to check if you're going to buy one of these second hand is to make sure it's got plenty of bridge, just in case there is a little bit of kind of cave in with the neck. But this one's as good as gold. I've got a newer one from the 90s, a 461S. This is the 365S, S for solid. And that one too, I keep that at City Lit for teaching, and again that's got lots of volume. So this packs a bit of a punch, I reckon. This is more of a pro level guitar, and I have to say they really did know what they were doing. This is a lovely strumming guitar. Now, I did warn you this wasn't going to be particularly scientific or comprehensive, but we might get a bit nerdy now, at least. This is an FG200, and this was one of the first guitars that was made when manufacture was moved to Taiwan in 71. This one was made in 72, October the 20th, 72, if you want to know. And this has what they call a tan label for you people who are interested in that kind of stuff. And this one actually is quite a rare guitar because the tan label here doesn't say Taiwan, it just has Yamaha and then the model number FG200, and they were produced in limited numbers between August and November of 72, and then we see the word Taiwan on here. I bought this one in a charity shop about a year ago, maybe a bit longer. I saw it in the window from quite a way off, and the sun was just coming on it, and the world is full of ruined guitars that have been left out in the sun. If you ever go to a car boot sale and you see ruined classical guitars, for instance, by the dozen that are just lying in the sun, it's a sad thing. Anyway, I rescued it, I brought it home. It was a little bit traumatized and shocked, and it has had issues. Chief among them, of course, it had the folding in half effect, and I took it to my friend Michael Cameron over in Camden, who did a lovely job of shaving down the bridge. I've got a capo on it because it's happiest that way. I used this for my video Wichita Lineman, which I covered, and it's a beautiful sounding guitar, particularly with the capo on. It'll work without, but I just love it for this very delicate kind of thing. It's a very quiet guitar. really a joy to play. It's not a strummer, it's not robust, and it won't stand much in the way of abuse, and it doesn't really have a whole lot of volume. But as I say, in common with the other guitars, this guitar does record absolutely beautifully. I was very lucky to pay no more than 50 quid for this guitar. So look, that's a little ramble through the FGs that I have. That's 4 of them here. As I say, there's another one that I keep at college from the 90s. Again, that's a solid top guitar, the 461S. My experience with the solid top ones is they're less likely to have issues than the plywood guitars. This one, to be clear, is also a completely plywood guitar, but you know, they don't do badly, do they? 1972 and we're 2025 now, and this guitar is still really singing beautifully. And finally, through my slightly haphazard exploration of the world of FG guitars, here's one that's not in the FG series at all. This is an L series guitar, L for luxury. And from the mid-70s onwards, I think Yamaha started to produce more grown-up guitars, more pro-level guitars, initially for the home market, but they export widely and they're very popular. The L series runs alongside the FG series, but whisper it, this is really an upgrade. Much better woods, much better construction, a real pro-level guitar that demands to be taken seriously. And it's a very beautiful guitar. I think these guitars compete favourably with the classic Martin D28 and D18 models, which are the Dreadnoughts, the D28 with the rosewood back and sides, the D18 with the mahogany, and this is the LL16. LL16M, so it has mahogany back and sides. I just liked the nutty sound of this guitar in the shop. I was all ready to buy the rosewood version, but you know, my head was turned by the sound of this thing, that warm, slightly nutty, beautiful, almost fragrant kind of sound, if a sound can be fragrant, that you'll get. Engelmann spruce, so it's got this citrus yellow look to it. It is more expensive. The list price of this guitar is maybe £1,100, but they price match. Now, I am in no way affiliated with Yamaha, but I do quite like a price match. I happen to find it on sale in the UK on a legitimate site for about £850, so good on them. That's what I ended up paying in Wardour Street. If you happen to be in London and you want to play nice guitars, get yourself down to the showroom in Wardour Street where Chapels used to be, down in the basement there. Lots of very lovely guitars, and they're very patient and knowledgeable, and you can sit and play your heart out. They even have little isolation booths and all sorts of things for you to try. So look, I'm not sponsored in any way by Yamaha. I wish I were, but I would say, if you want to take yourself a little bit more seriously, because that's also what this has done for me as some kind of a guitarist, having this guitar, it feels like I've taken a step up, not just my guitar, then this might be for you. This one happens to be in a little Joni Mitchell open G tuning, because that's where it was for my finger picking workshop the other day. The one thing that was slightly disconcerting, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but the old FGs have a first pin to sixth pin distance of 50 mil, I think. So a centimetre between each string. This is now 55, so 11 mil between the centre of each pin to the next one. And at the beginning, I did just find that tripped me up just a tiny little bit. I mean, if you're used to playing Martin guitars, that shouldn't matter to you. The nut, which I think is 44 mil, is exactly the same as a Martin, and so on and so on. But if you're stepping up from these old FGs, that might just trip you up. It is also kind of that much longer as well, so I was misfretting a bit. Weirdly though, I did try when I was down there a few modern FGs, and they are at the same 55 mil width, so I don't know when that switch came. So if you've been used to playing more modern guitars, maybe that's not an issue for you, but that was something that really caught me out at the beginning. But I wouldn't hesitate to get yourself something like this. As I say, it competes very favourably, and I played lots of guitars. I was playing Guild, and I was playing Martin, new Martins, old Martins, Gibsons, and I really couldn't find anything I liked, anything like the price of this guitar. Okay, well there you are, a quite personal, and as I say, not very scientific look at a bunch of old guitars and one new one.